Well, culturally, there's this, view pre-COVID, if you like, that, that you had to do the 70, 80 hours a week. You had to do the grind. And the problem with that is, there's a reason why footy seasons go for 24 weeks, 25 weeks a year is because, athletes can't perform at that level all year round. They need an off season, they need downtime. That's why they play once a week. And in our careers and in our businesses, you have to take the same attitude that you can't be there, delivering results as an organization 24 hours a day. You got to have that downtime to recharge the battery. And that play aspect is really important.
In this upcoming episode, I'm joined by Patrick O'Connor, who runs an organisation called The Killing Zone. We discuss mental health, business owners and the challenges that they've faced during the pandemic, and a whole vast of other mental health related issues. I think this is of real value, but if anyone finds any topic of conversation distressing, please note that there are organisations such as Lifeline or Beyond Blue that you can speak to. Thank you. All right, so I'm really excited to be joined by Patrick O'Connor from the Killing Zone organisation. Now, we'll speak a little bit to that name in a second, Pat, but I've known of you, is probably, to be fair, like we have caught up on occasions based upon, our background in both financial planning, you being an insurance advisor. I know your brother, and I was, I suppose, surprised, but also pleasantly surprised that you've changed things quite a bit in your life, and it seems like for all the right reasons. We've had some conversations before on other mediums as well, so I'm really excited to have you. Firstly, how are you doing?
I'm great. Life's good. I'm in a good spot.
That's good. And I think it's a really good start to let the audience, the community, know what it's like to move from being a business owner, being an insurance advisor with all the pressures that come along with that, and then becoming a founder of an organization called The Killing Zone. Can you maybe give us a little bit of background on the journey?
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks for the invitation today. I'm really excited to share a little bit of my story. So I was a financial advisor for a better part of 15 odd years. And then I made a transition into corporate life. So I joined a large insurance company and worked my way up to the executive level, and enjoyed the challenges and the pressures and the excitement of operating at that level. And I got to a point just after my 40th birthday, so we're 10 years ago, where I came to work one Monday morning and sat in the car park, and I realized that the tank was empty, and it wasn't the car, it was me. It was that I was completely spent. And I went through a process then of seeking, treatment with my GP, and I was diagnosed as having depression, anxiety, and suffering from some other sort of comorbid conditions, extreme fatigue and sleeplessness and that sort of thing. And that put me on a journey where I made a decision that, I couldn't do both. I couldn't focus on my health and have an executive career as well. So I essentially, retired and left the organization and focused on my health. And the next 10 years, I went through a journey through the Australian mental health system, multiple different treatments, different medications, speaking therapies, psychologists, psychiatrists, and reached a point where, I'll be honest, I was at a point of ending my life, because I wasn't getting better, and the harder I tried, the worse I was getting. So I made a decision in 2017 to move to America and access treatments that are not available here, which were fantastic, and really turned around my life and gave me health back. And I've got to a point where, look, I'd say I still, suffer from mental illness, but I would say that it's probably no more or less than anyone else. And what I've been doing the last couple of years is I founded the Killing Zone organisation to advocate with government to access some of these treatments that are available overseas, to make them available here in Australia. And the Killing Zone was actually a name that that was coined when I was in a hospital in America, when I was talking to some US Navy veterans who were getting treatment as well, and they describe severe mental illness as the killing zone, because if you live in an area where you're in extreme distress and there's no treatment and there's no recovery, well, your life expectancy reduces by 30 years. So we all worked out, well, we're in that age bracket, so we coined it the killing zone. So yeah, it's a point of advocacy, speaking from experience. And we've had a lot of success. We've been able to bring 2 of those treatments to Australia, and they're available in hospitals here. And that's all on the back of, I guess, consumer-driven, patient-driven advocacy.
It's quite a journey. It's quite a title. It's quite a name. I've thought about it, somewhat, and I think, well, what are your intentions around calling your organisation the killing zone? You've kind of very well described it, but I think, it makes sense that when your organisation is about trying to exact change and make people stand up and take notice, particularly those people in leadership and influential positions, it makes sense that you would call an organisation something like that, because obviously, we're not talking about an organisation that is effectively assisting individuals with mental issues, are we? We're talking about you trying to exact change from a systemic point of view.
There's so much competing interest from organisations in the mental health space, not-for-profits and charities that are looking for money, that are looking for time. And, we don't do anything other than try and put forward a strong message that everyone knows that the system is broken, but there are actually plenty of new treatment modalities and strategies that exist around the world that are having phenomenal success that we don't get access to here. So we decided we'd be, a little bit controversial with the name, because we want people to sit up and take notice that, we're people who came back from the edge. All of us are people who have been there at one point in their life and had to make that decision whether it was worth continuing or not. And, if our story doesn't get heard, then it's a real failure on the system to listen. So look, yeah, we're not shy boys, and
no, and I don't think we want to be. And I think there is some. You correct me if I'm wrong, but there is some sort of cultural sensitivity, and probably for some, good functional reasons, but cultural sensitivity around discussing suicide in a very open way. It seems to be almost something that is hushed. Or not communicated as much as it probably should. So I suppose calling it that is confronting those attitudes.
We're trying to do that, and there's, when a celebrity or a sportsman or someone else ends their own life, they're not doing it because they're having a great time and life's cheery. They're doing it because they're in a pretty horrible situation. And a lot of those stories don't really get heard. We have the obituary about how great their life is, but no one's talking about how bad it was right at the end, right at that moment. And we've been there, and we can also, through our overseas experience, talk about, well, what are the things that are happening overseas to people that are in the killing zone type of situations that are saving them. And, that's the exciting part. There's, we've had some phenomenal success in that area. And we're going to have more success.
That's great. And I cast my mind back to your comment around, I wasn't feeling the best. It wasn't a great time for me, so I went and saw my GP. So that what I want is to kind of distill what that actually looked like for you a little bit more, with a little bit more specificity, because I think, what does that mean, to not feel well? What does it mean to not be functioning? When does a person start to take note and say, well, you know what, enough's enough. I'm not feeling the best. How sometimes we can, because it's hard to talk about these things, we can kind of put generalizations over the top of them and say, yeah, I'm okay. I'm just not feeling great. So, could you give us that real kind of understanding of what was going on for you as much as you possibly can? And I know it's quite personal and it's quite sensitive. So, but
it's all good.
Yeah,
it's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one before, but off the top of my head, the best way to describe it is if you're used to driving down the highway, at 110 kilometers an hour, and where you've got your foot on the accelerator, and that's comfortable for you, and that keeps the car chugging along. When you notice you've got to push that foot harder and harder to the floor to get it to 110 k's an hour, you know, and it requires far more effort to do something that took a lot less effort previously. You know, something's wrong. And for me, you know, I was essentially getting in the car and it wasn't starting. And I'm like, well, we've got some real issues here. You know, I'm not able to perform at work to the same degree that I was able to cognitively. It was really difficult to make the same level of decisions. In my personal life, there were relationship issues. You know, I was leaning too much on alcohol. You know, you just start to put the pieces of your life together and go, this isn't how I like my life to be. And I've got to take a step back and go, well, what is happening? Why is this, you know, not functioning at the level that I want it to? And that's, you know, going into the GP is a great way to start. But before anyone does, if they feel that they need help, I think it's really important to sit back and, you know, give a real honest assessment about how you're traveling personally. How's your health? How's your diet? How's your exercise? How's the amount of time you're spending at work? How's your work stresses? How's your relationship and pressures there with the kids? And sort of put all that down and go, well, I'm not feeling great, but I can see why. I can see there's some things that I can do here that will improve it. But if you're looking at all of those things and you see, like, you know, I'm leading, doing all the things right, and things are still really not coming together for me. I'm really struggling. That's great information for the GP to be able to then help to make an assessment and a potential diagnosis.
It's almost like the mental, you know, we think that, I suppose, we can control everything. And so when things aren't going well in our life, we just have to make changes and, you know, this change and that change, and it's just going to all of a sudden automatically improve. But there's something almost physiological or biological about, you know, depression or anxiety related stuff, where you can put you can try to do a lot of things, but behaviorally you continue to exhibit the same patterns, and it's almost like it's an uncontrollable thing. Would that be, I'm trying to describe what I would know from my own personal background. I've had my own experiences with anxiety and depression as a young man, as a younger man. So, you know, would that be a good description?
The mental illness can manifest for a variety of reasons. It can be genetic, you know, conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. A lot of those things, you know, that's a genetically, you're predisposed to that. You've got conditions which may develop because of being in a stressful environment, like PTSD or complex PTSD, that type of thing. And you've got things like anxiety and some form of psychosis, where it might be from recreational drug use or alcohol. And in other cases, it's just your body just breaks down. So, you know, it's really difficult, and people spend a lot of time trying to understand the root causes of mental illness. To me, you know, I could probably throw my net around all of those categories and say, look, there's a little bit of everything in that about what probably manifested in me to break me. But, you know, you should never feel like you're at fault. The most important thing is to acknowledge that there's a problem and put your hand up and say, right, we've got to address this.
So I'm interested as well in the fact that you were in an insurance, you had an insurance background. And I know, you know, when you're writing insurance for clients, mental health can come up quite frequently, and insurance companies deal with that in certain ways. How do you think they were dealing with it in the time that you were an insurance advisor? How do you think, so that's one question. And the other question is really, to what extent was that an appropriate business for you to work in hindsight?
I think the industry's certainly gone through a lot of turmoil, and from the perspective of, you know, going back 20 years, how mental illness was understood and underwritten was certainly, you know, was vastly different depending on the company. Some companies were pretty strict, others weren't. And a lot of it then didn't come down to the disclosure from the client, so there was issues around that. But you know, I felt that as an advisor, we certainly weren't overly educated in what we were looking for, and clients probably weren't overly forthcoming with information as well because of the stigma around it. And then the industry gone through a period of significant claims experience, which has and then resulted in a different attitude towards leniency around accepting new applications and around the process that they put around claims payments, which is, well documented in the Banking and Finance Royal Commission about the poor industry practices. Now, with the changes in policies, I think, it's less of a concern with the shorter term payment period. But when I realised that, I was now essentially a claimant, it put me on the other side of the fence, and I can tell you, I realised pretty quickly that the industry that we work in can save lives about providing the income support through income protection. But my God, they made it hard.
Yes. In terms of the claim itself?
Yes.
Of course. Yeah, okay. And this organisation is your blood, sweat and tears, right? So, and you're quite devoted, and you've devoted your life to it in effect. And it's quite a change and a transition from being an insurance advisor to doing what you're doing now. Why, in your view, I know it's a very simple question, but why, in your view, is this organisation so important? What is so inherently wrong with the system at the moment that you felt the need to do this?
Oh, without using expletives.
Well, I mean, I could beep it out later.
I felt that the system, I felt there was a moral duty too, as someone who had gone from that first GP appointment through multiple doctors, treatments, medications, through to a point where suicide was something that I was contemplating, and I was maybe an hour away from that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unfortunately, is the route that so many Australians take each year, or go through each year, and they don't all end up being able to live the next day. Mm-hmm. What I was able to do, thanks to the support of my insurance company at the time, was to travel to the US to find out, well, what are the other treatments that we don't have? And what I'm trying to do is take them and put them at that point where people are at that last resort where nothing else works, and say, no, guys, we do have something else for you to try. It will save your life. And that's why I started the Killing Zone organisation, because personally I had great success in teaming up with some doctors to bring those treatments over here, and there are hospitals now that are using those. Mm-hmm. However, because those treatments, and I'll be blunt, they're a lot of them end up in curing patients or bringing them back to a point where they no longer need medication. We're flying in the face of big pharmaceutical companies. Patrick O'Connor is no longer a $15,000 a year client of Pfizer. Mm-hmm. Thanks to the treatments from overseas. So that's a threat. So the new treatments are not widely embraced because there's no lobby group sitting outside Scott Morrison's door advocating curing people. It's about medication to continue to treat symptoms, not cure the underlying conditions.
So at its worst and at its most cynical, what you're basically saying is that antidepressants are being used because whilst there are other alternatives out there too, and obviously antidepressants are very helpful, not saying that they're not, of course they're very helpful, but there are other alternatives out there that can actually, and starting to be researched, and there's evidence around actually assisting people break through the need to have an ongoing attachment to these sort of drugs. But they're just not widely accepted yet. And you're saying that there's plenty of them in the US, and we're starting to see that happen. And I suppose in a way you're trying to bridge that gap. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to bridge that gap. I'm trying to be, I wanted to do, my part was to start to spread the message with doctors that these treatments are available. And a lot of doctors have now then traveled to the US through contacts that I've made, and they've educated and using the treatments. That helps hundreds of patients, but I'd really like to help millions of people. And that's where lobbying at a federal level has been quite successful in raising awareness with politicians in all fields, in all parties, that there are better solutions. And your point of antidepressants is a good one. Antidepressants and antipsychotics have a place, and they do give a lot of people a good quality of life, but they only work in a third of circumstances.
Yep.
So you've got 2/3 of people who don't get benefit, and if two-thirds of people don't get benefit for a long period of time, I'll tell you, the place they end up in is a place called the killing zone.
Yeah, and it's you don't get the benefit, but you get this the effects of the medication and the
side effects.
Yeah, the side effects. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what do you see is that outside of the medication side of it, what do you see as being the main differences between the best of, because I'll say the best of the US-based system versus the best of the Australian-based system? Because I'm sure in the US-based system as well, there's varying tiers and degrees of help that people can get. But at the best, compare it to the best that we have here.
The two things that they do much better than us, and people, Australians like to talk negative about the US healthcare system, but what I will say this is the funding model is inherently broken.
Yes.
But the treatments available are the best in the world.
Gotcha.
Just that there's a small number of people
accessing. Yep.
The first thing they do so much better than us is the diagnosis. When you go in to see a mental health practitioner, the first thing and you're talking about mental health conditions, the first thing they're doing is doing broad spectrum blood tests. They're looking for any other type of conditions that could be affecting your mood, your health. They will do a DNA testing to see if you're genetically predisposed for mental health conditions, which obviously is it's a real factor. But then the DNA testing will also help them guide on, if you do need medications, which medications based on your genetic profile are more likely to work than others.
Wow. Yeah.
So they compile all of this information up front.
Yeah.
For them to sit back and say, okay, Joe, based on all this, this is where we're starting to think you look like, and what we think a treatment plan could look like. In Australia, we get a 15 to 20 minute consult. We do a 15 question yes, no form. And at the end of it, you get 5 to 6 psychology visits, and you're normally walking out there with a script or two for an antidepressant or an antipsychotic, which is a generic guess about what may or may not work for you. So the problem with that is if you get the diagnosis wrong, then you get the treatment wrong. And if the treatment's medication, as you said before, then you don't get the benefits, but you get the side effects. And then the doctor's trying to disseminate, well, is Joe's condition now deteriorating, or is it just the side effects of the medications that I've misprescribed to him? That's where the first part where the US get it so much better is they wait and take a holistic approach to the diagnosis. And on the end of the spectrum, where they're so much better than us, is they've put their hand up and said, well, the current range of antidepressants and medications aren't doing it for 2/3 of people. So let's find solutions that do.
Okay. So it's both the original discovery, let's call it discovery process, because I'm a financial advisor, going through the blood tests, going through the circumstantial issues that may be externally creating the environment as well. And I think from having a conversation with you before, Pat, you've described to me what they diagnosed through your blood test that was able to send you on the right trajectory. Could you explain that?
That's a great point. So after I went to the US, and I started, it was kind of like starting from scratch with a doctor, and sent me off with some blood tests, and we did some screening questionnaires and a whole bunch of stuff. And the first thing that he diagnosed is that I have a testosterone condition, so I don't produce testosterone. And to put that in, the analogy he gave me, he said, you've got the body of an athlete, but you've got the testosterone of a 12-year-old girl. You don't produce, enough of the DHEA and the testosterone that you need to run your body. You're always going to feel tired. Now, whether I'd had that condition, whether that always affected me all of my life or only in later life, you don't know. But until I then started hormone replacement therapy, I was no chance of ever getting better. And in the 7 years of treatment in Australia prior to that, I'd never once been tested for testosterone. But there's very clear linkages between depression and low testosterone in men over the age of 45. So, there's just some really basic things that they go down to tick off and, for guys or for females, and there's a different suite of tests that they run. And you talk to most doctors here in Australia about running those sort of bloods, and they look at you like, well, no, he's got depression. Like, well,
Okay.
Maybe, but let's rule out a whole bunch of other things.
So I want to get into the topic of specific to business owners and the challenges they face in a second. But just before we do that, we're faced with an Australian system that, we're not going to potty it here, but, may have some challenges. Now, we've got individuals that need support. How are we, if we're not going to go overseas and do what you did, Pat, not everyone's going to do that. How do we combat some of the challenges or the more challenging parts of our system as individuals? How can we combat that?
If you're asking, so if an individual's, watching this podcast today and thinking, I want to get some help, my first bit of advice would be to do what we talked about earlier about doing a bit of an assessment of your own life and writing that down in a page, just quadrant it up and write how your different parts of your life are going. But don't also then, if you've got a regular GP, that's great. But there are GP practices out there who specialize in mental health. And I would spend a bit of time to look around to find a GP who is an expert in mental health. They're the ones who are going to they've had more experience in it. These are the guys who are guys and girls, more likely to holistically treat you, to do those blood tests, to do the DNA test, to look at, your holistic situation, because you can't diagnose anything in 15 minutes. And that's where the majority, 93% of all mental health conditions in Australia are diagnosed by GPs. And they're done in one appointment, which is pretty impressive because it normally takes a psychiatrist around 6 hours to do it. So GPs are doing it in 15 minutes. And what does that tell us? It tells us that they're getting it wrong. So, I'm not saying it's GP's fault because we're putting too much pressure on them to make those diagnoses, but that's what the reality is. And the statistics show that in 50% of cases, GPs are getting it wrong. So if you want to give yourself the best opportunity, firstly, make sure it's an extended consult. Feel free to get 2 or 3 opinions from different GPs, but search out practices that specialize in mental health and use those as your starting point. In your own life, if you go through that and you feel like, well, look, it's not necessarily a mental illness, I've been running myself hard. You got to make that personal assessment, got to make that call yourself and be really honest about how you're living your life. Like, there's no point sitting in a GP on Monday morning saying, look, I'm feeling really tired and run down. If you worked 100 hours last week, you had a big weekend, you're not eating right, you're not exercising, you can control what you can control. And that will certainly be a big part of assessing whether it is an illness or wellness problem.
Let's go into the business owner side of things. And, we both have our experiences in that. I think I always draw upon my understanding of what financial advisors are going through some of the studies that come through, particularly one from Dr. Adam Fraser recently about the mental health of financial advisors, and it being pretty sobering at the moment that many of the financial advisors just aren't enjoying their time at work. In fact, I think it was 37% or something like that weren't enjoying their time at work. There's plenty of stresses, changes in legislation that affect businesses. I think it also can be just extrapolated forward and looking at the cafes as an example, and the constant lockdowns and the pressures. There's so many business owners at the moment that have a lot of stresses. Can we talk about the mental health of business owners specifically during these times?
It's unprecedented what a lot of small businesses have had to go through. And you look at places like Melbourne and cafes, as you mentioned, Joe, the uncertainties that have gone with that. It's very difficult to put forward a plan for someone to maintain, optimal mental health when you're going through these lockdowns and not lockdowns and then soft lockdowns and the like. But, let's say we're moving forward into a more, normal world. the thing that it becomes apparent to me when I'm doing consultancy work for small business owners, and I ask them, what are the three things that you love about your job? If they can't rattle off three things straight away, then I ask them why they're doing that job. And, a lot of them will say, well, I used to enjoy doing this. And I say, well, do you still do it? And, well, no. Well, you got to engineer your life so you enjoy it. We're only here once. And if there are parts of your job, and look at financial planning, if the part of the job that the Joe loves doing is the client interactions, but you're finding yourself spending 70% of your time managing staff, well, you've got to reassess, how your organization works to get you back doing the fun stuff. That's really important. And then you have to overlay that as well with, I'll ask them, what are the three things that you enjoy doing outside of work? And everyone can write them down. And then I'll ask them to highlight how many hours a week they spend doing that. And, you've got to have that work-life balance, because you want to roll into work buzzed on Monday morning. And that comes from having a good personal life as well. If it's playing golf or playing with the kids or spending time with friends, you've got to have that balance. And you can't be optimal in the workplace if you're always there. It's impossible.
I agree. And I think there's some sort of stigma associated with play. I think about the idea of work-life balance, and I don't like I have not felt I resonated with the idea of work-life balance for a while now, and I'm trying to work out what other words that I could use. And I think the way that I would position it is passion play. And
perfect.
I think you need to be passionate if it's about your family, if it's about your business, and then the play is the other side. Just do something for the sheer sake of doing it and enjoying it, whether it be playing guitar or music or whatever it is. And I just don't think enough people do that. And it's interesting, Pat, when I think about people that get sick, health conditions, I think about my late father. He started doing art right at the end when he was his most sick. And I thought to myself, wow, he's doing what he really kind of enjoyed as a child, but it's coming back to him now. Why do we all wait until we're sick? Why don't we do stuff during our lives? Because that's what's enriching.
Well, culturally, there's this, view pre-COVID, if you like, that, that you had to do the 70, 80 hours a week. You had to do the grind. And the problem with that is, there's a reason why footy seasons go for 24 weeks, 25 weeks a year, is because, athletes can't perform at that level all year round. They need an off season, they need downtime. That's why they play once a week. And in our careers and in our businesses, you have to take the same attitude, that you can't be there, delivering results as an organization 24 hours a day. You got to have that downtime to recharge the battery. And that play aspect is really important. Your work gives you the ability to have that social life, that play life, that family life. Go and enjoy it.
What do you think business owners can actually do? Because they're responsible, and part of the issue for them is that they feel very much responsible for the wellness and the well-being of the individuals that work within their organization. So, what do you think they can do to improve the mental health awareness aspects of things, but also just generally improving the standards of health within their staff?
Culturally, you've got to practice what you preach. If you view that you need to make sure that you, as an owner, have a healthy personal life and play life outside work, that's got to trickle down into the staff as well. That when we're at work, let's get the job done, let's do it professionally, let's get the right results, but then let's go and have some fun, and not let staff feel like having fun is frowned upon, or that they're negating their responsibilities at work. You want them to have passion to turn up. A lot of businesses talk about that. When people aren't they're salaried employees, they don't work as hard as people who are invested with equity in the business. Well, I don't think that's always true. I think if people enjoy where they're working, they will turn up and put in.
They will.
How do you make that environment?
Yeah.
The place that they want to work as hard as possible, because they enjoy working there, because you give them that work life, the passion and play aspect is what it can work for everyone.
So our pod's called "It's Never About Money," right? Has there ever been a time in your life where you've pursued profitability in and of itself, and it's not really allowed you to maintain your health?
Maybe not so much about the money, but more about goal driven.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, look, closely linked. But to be fair, when you're in corporate life and executive roles, the salary is quite generous. So to me, it was more about achieving results as an organization and strategic goals of organizations and things like that. But those goals were put above everything else: health, lifestyle, fitness, relationships. Nothing came before the goal of achieving the success that the organization was seeking. And it's such a stupid thing to do. So many really smart people who get it know how dumb it is, but continue to do it. If you run that hard, that long, you will blow up.
Yep.
And I'm a case in point.
Yep. So what changes do you think you've made, Pat, that have been the biggest changes for you and to your mental health?
When you get to that point where you're so sick that you can't get out of bed, you're suffering from really bad fatigue, you've got sleeplessness, and just getting through the day without having 2 or 3 naps is an achievement. When you've been at that level and you get back to a point of reasonably good health and happiness, you say, I look back at corporate now and I go, I'd never go back to that. Why would I run back to the thing that broke me in the first place? I'm not going to stick my head back in the blender. Okay.
No.
Sure.
You've seen the light.
I've seen the light. Now, that's not to say that I don't love that environment or that I miss it. I miss the camaraderie. There's a lot of things about it, but you just get a view of, wow, I'd like to be able to do it 2 or 3 days a week, but that opportunity may or may not arise again. But you realize that, I'm going to turn 50 in 2 weeks. And, the battle that I had required a lot of medication, and that had a big impact on my body. My liver and kidneys are at early stage of failure. So, if I'm going to live, I'll probably need a transplant at some point in the next 15, 20 years. So to me, it's looking, well, what do I want to spend, the next 15, 20 years doing? I'll be honest, it's not logging in at 7 o'clock in the morning to 40 emails and a long day of diary management.
Fair enough. That makes some sense. Do you define your success differently now than you used to?
I define success by how much I can improve other people's lives. For a long time, for me, it was about surviving, and then it was about wellness and thriving. But now it's about how many other people can I help avoid the mistakes that I've made, and how many other people who are in that severe distress that comes with, chronic poor health, that I can help bring back to a better quality of life. And
well, I mean, that says something to the fact that, the very mere fact that you've created the killing zone itself means that you must be well enough to do so, because clearly survival is the first point, right? Get past survival, then try to thrive yourself. Once you thrive, maybe you can actually start looking after other people.
Yeah, I lost a lot of mates in the killing zone, and it's a very sobering part of my life to think about friends that are no longer around to talk to. I don't want other people to go through the experience I went through, and there's a very clear path that can stop that. And we talked about today about stopping it right at the start with better diagnosis, but enjoying your life now. The further you can stay away in happiness, in a point of happiness, keeps you away from the other end of the spectrum. And I can tell you, it's a place that I know where I'd rather be.
Yeah. Do you think the pandemic and what we've seen with the conflict that's going on at the moment, the floods and all of these types of events that seem to be just nonstop, do you think they're affecting people's mental health? And I mean, obviously they probably are, but what do we do about this?
There's no question it's having a demonstrable impact on mental health. Even before the floods, the pandemic, we reached a point where prescription of anti-anxiety medications is now at a point where it's almost double what it was pre-COVID. And these medications were only ever designed to be used for 4 weeks. Medications like Valium, was only ever meant to be a 4-week medication. Now we have people, several million people who have been on it for, over 3 years. And these medications have side effects, they're addictive, they can take lives. And what I view out of the pandemic now with antidepressants use as well is that, the easy fix has been to reach for the prescription pad, but these medications aren't risk-free. And, they've been a stopgap measure and they've helped people get stabilized, but now they need proper professional help in how to rebuild their lives and all aspect of their lives. And that's the problem with the system we have now is that professionals are not readily available.
But the solution is to do your due diligence, right? Your solution is to find the doctors that specialize, the GPs that specialize in mental illness as a very starting point, and then to start to document what is not going right. Those are the kind of first grounding tools or things that we can do.
Absolutely. And a doctor's only ever, the thing about mental illness is that it's 100% diagnosed in Australia, based on what comes out of your mouth.
Yes.
So your doctor is only ever going to be as good as what you tell them. So that's critical. And asking questions around side effects of medications and combinations of medications, we've got to start to treat the advice we get from our doctors with a far greater lens than we ever have before.
What keeps you up at night, Pat? What's still to do in your mission?
I get agitated about the lack of traction. I mean, the TGA is an organisation that has been a brutal barrier to new treatments coming into Australia, and people, we've seen through the COVID process what happens when there's a focus on bringing in medications to treat COVID, and the speed with which that was done. There are incredible treatments that are available that are still being, bottlenecked through the TGA at, snail speed. Professor John Skerritt is someone who I hold personally responsible. He's been involved in seeing these treatments pass through drug tests and drug trials all around the world. But when it comes to Australia, it just gets sandbagged. And that's what makes me angry is that, today there'll be 8 Australians that'll lose their life as a result of mental illness. And there are treatments available that they just can't get access to because the TGA is not moving.
So what in your organisation are you doing about it, and how can people reach out, help, inform themselves, make their own decisions?
I'll be honest, I'm very apolitical as far as this topic goes. Whoever wants to move, I'm happy to support. But what's been very clear is that the Liberals are very wedded to the pharmaceutical industry. And that Labor is far more open to overseas ideas, concepts, new treatment modalities. All of my meetings with federal Labor ministers have been wholeheartedly encouraging in that they know that there are new ways that we can do things. So I'd be challenging your local MPs and senators about what their view is on mental health treatments and the role of the health system in improving those. Because if we continue to go down the path of what the Liberals have done, where we're essentially just leaving it all up to the states. That's really unfair because it's just putting too much pressure on GPs.
And in terms of people reaching out to you, Pat, is that something that you encourage? Is there an opportunity to get involved with the Killing Zone? Is this a vehicle for you to specifically lobby to these people of influence, or are other people getting involved?
Yeah, I certainly get a lot of contact from people wanting to know more information. At the moment, we're we're solely focused on the upcoming election and lobbying candidates.
Yep.
So from that perspective, the best way to contact me is to connect on LinkedIn. But what we will do in the new year, depending on not the new year after the election, depending on where things land, is start to give people an online resource tool about where they can go for access to information on some of the stuff that we've sort of alluded to today on treatments. What can be accessed in Australia, what can't, and if it can, or where it is, how to contact. Because we're not mental health professionals. We're advocates with lived experience, but we'd like to provide a resource platform for people to access information on how they can help themselves.
Great. Well, Pat, this has been a real pleasure to chat to you again. I've chatted to you before. I'm really happy that I can bring this to our community. I think it's a really, really important thing to highlight mental health as being an issue that needs to be made aware of, communicated. And, I think from the name of your organization to the effort that you bring, it's a real credit to you. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for your time, Joe. Wish you all the best.
Awesome.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.